I've waited a week to really put my thoughts together on what Mass Effect Andromeda is trying to say and what it's trying to do. There's a lot to unpack, and now that I'm watching the credits roll, I think it's about time I get around to assembling the hodgepodge of ideas and boiling down into what makes this game work, and sadly, what takes away from those few moments of brightness. I am planning on spoiling some of the major plot points of this game, so if you haven't played it yet and intend to, I would recommend turning this overview off. But at this point, I would highly recommend that those who have waited for this long to purchase it should absolutely wait. The game is good at times, but it is janky and inconsistent. Among the myriad of problems I encountered from a narrative point of view, I ran across far too many glitches and technical problems that won't be solved with just brute forcing the thing. My PC is modest, to be sure, but fully capable of running this game on some mixed settings. Don't bother. Frame drops are everywhere, and texture pop-ins are just as bad as they were in the original Mass Effect. Remember those moments watching a character's face load in as you were talking to them? They're back. Now that that's out of the way, let's have some context. You play as one of two riders, twins who are part of the Andromeda Initiative, a huge undertaking where 100,000 beings from the Milky Way are making the trek across dark space to the next galaxy over. The events here are fuzzy. Checking the dates back to the original Mass Effect games, it seems you are leaving around the same time as Mass Effect 2 is starting to ramp up. After 600 years of cryosleep, you wake up to find yourself in the Andromeda Galaxy, and things quickly take a turn. You are a member of the Human Ark, one of 3 other Arks that are carrying the major Citadel species across space to get to Andromeda. You're hoping to raise your flag on what was supposed to be a golden world, a place that has been vetted to be perfect for human occupation. What transpired is, well, a Mass Effect story. Things go awry and plans change, and along the way, you take on the title of Pathfinder, part human leader and part adventurer who must travel to various planets in the Helios cluster to check for viability and just to see what is there. It's kind of a mess. The entire introduction to a whole new cast and galaxy is met with an appropriate amount of wonder, but as many people have already pointed out, the animations and facial rigging takes you completely out of the story-driven scenes. I worked hard to try to get my male rider to look at least kinda like me, and I largely succeeded, but faces aren't always hooked onto the models correctly. Sometimes they look really great and everything would jive well, but at times the load-in would fail along the line, and my face would look pockmarked and overly distorted. It's that kind of mess that defines the whole experience of Mass Effect Andromeda. For every time that things are gelling together and creating a really compelling sequence, there's at least a dozen more that look and behave brokenly. I had quests that were uncompletable because of bugs, glitches that had characters phase in and out of walls, and long conversations with people that were half a world away because their pathing went awry. And one line from one of your companions says it all. At one point, your Turian partner says out loud, "Is this kind of evil universal?" And the answers that Mass Effect silently conveys is a resolute yes. Even though you are a galaxy away, full of vetted and background-checked beings, you still run into the same age-old conflicts that define the political infighting of the Citadel. You will still run into Krogan, who are sour about the genophage, Solarians and their holier-than-thou science, and humans who just can't help but steal and pirate across the galaxy. They are tired themes, and ones that we explored to death in the original trilogy. The promise of a whole new galaxy, with all the terror and exploration that it promises, are given up for the sake of treading upon the same ground that we've already encountered. In Mass Effect 3, we spent the majority of that game solving these issues, reconciling these myriad groups so that we could face off against a greater evil. And I can't help but think that the writers, in stepping back from the mess of the last game, found themselves writing into the exact same hole. Halfway through dealing with another rebellious Krogan offshoot, I wanted my conversation choices to expand. I was hoping for a left trigger pull that would allow me to say something along the lines of, "Not this shit again," kind of like the press X button for Heavy Rain.
Not this shit again.
Not this shit again.
There are 2 intelligent races vying for control of the Helios cluster when you arrive, and to be quite honest, I felt pretty bored meeting both of them. You see, in Mass Effect lore, it's implied that the reason all the major races in the Milky Way are humanoid is because they are all evolutionary offshoots of the races that came before. They develop for 50,000 years, the Reapers sweep in and reset the whole thing, and then a new set of species rise up. It's not great logic, but it works for this universe. So then why do the Angara have 2 legs? Why are they humanoid at all? How come the Ket, who take the DNA of every species they find and assimilate the best parts into their genome, how did they decide that having 2 legs and 2 arms was the best way to spread their doctrine? Is that the height of the imagination from the creative team? And even then, there's some real problems with the way that their societies are portrayed. They have entirely new languages, which thankfully are translated easily, because of an onboard AI, but there are times where they either know a turn of phrase or they don't, and the difference between which can be a little tough to read. Your Angaran teammate, Jal, is a really intriguing character, but sometimes he will know what a phrase means, and at other times just stare at you, wondering what you were trying to say. This will oftentimes happen within the same scene. Your companions are no different. In previous games, even in other BioWare properties, you see a diverse crew of people with distinct personalities who all have their own internal goals and conflicts. You can choose to deal with them at your own leisure, and some of my favorite stories in games comes from some of these partner quests. Mass Effect 2 did this so well that it defined the entire game for me. It's all about building your team and ensuring that everyone can survive what you're trying to do. There's no such element here, and the third time around, it really only points out their deficiencies. You have a grumpy Krogan, some boring human partners, a Turian who has a weird fetish for the underworld and supply running, one is a joke character who tries to be humorous, another who takes things way too seriously, and then there's, of course, the rest of the crew who are just kinda there. None of their stories are all that compelling, especially when compared to Dragon Age Inquisition's cast. You don't have a lovable scoundrel like Dorian or their sarcastically funny Iron Bull. The only character that has any life to them is Peebee. She plays herself as this overly sexualized social outcast who just wants you to think she doesn't want to be there, but when she actually does. Is that the best way to have an Asari crew member? Liam, the most infuriating of the bunch, is a real shame. He has an interesting backstory and some nice beats to his progress over the story. I love that his family just launched an old gas-run car into space, hoping someday it'll find its way to Andromeda after 1,000,000 years. But his humor is grating, and his companion mission, while cool visually, calls into question his ability to be a team member. I tried playing as a writer who was calm, but would know how to joke. This was the only time in the entire playthrough where I openly scolded a crewmate. I didn't understand why he chose to engage with those people and why he had to do it behind my back. Worse yet, he seemed to really love that I scolded him for it. I keep dancing around it, but I use all of these points to illustrate one very serious problem that Andromeda does have. The story is just plain boring. Our main arc revolves around the Ket and their quest to exalt other species into their own. It's their way of reproducing through the manipulation of genetics. It's a pretty rote-by-the-book sort of story where evil is universal and only a beacon of light can combat it. We've played through this story, not just in Mass Effect, but in some other BioWare stuff like Dragon Age. And there are heapings of Inquisition in this mess. Replaying Inquisition just before this game, I found that much of the game can be bypassed. Do the major story beats for the zones, complete companion quests, and work your way through the main story quests, and you'll have a pretty tightly compacted 20 to 30 hour story that works really well. Anything around it is just fluff. You can choose to go and find those survivors off in the distance, but it doesn't impact the story or outcome in any way. It's just kind of there as something to do. Andromeda plays a lot of the same. Unlock a planet with its variety of side quests, and you can choose to do any number of them. Doing them increases the viability of the planet, and there are some neat rewards for doing so, but none of them are particularly necessary. You can get to 100% viability just by doing the big quests and unlocking some outpost locations, so going off and doing everything, it isn't required at all. Doing all of this in Inquisition was kind of fun because you didn't know what was important and what wasn't. It's more transparent the second time around, and Andromeda suffers for it. I was able to discern right away what would impact my writer's story and what was just the side content that could afford to be missed. So, when you do what I did and boil it down to these main quest objectives, the story really does start to lack. What starts as a quest of exploration and adventure becomes a very tired story of good versus evil, unity versus isolation, and how do we deal with this bad guy who just wants to ruin the stuff? The main quest itself only takes really about 10 hours just on its own. A lot of your time, at present I've spent 60 hours in the game, will be spent taking care of the side stuff, and none of it ever really circles back in on itself. For a game that tries to stress unity of species, it sure does go out of its way to push you away from the real threat in the system. All that being said, the game is a blast to play. The one thing that improved with each iteration of the series is the way combat worked, and there is no exception here. The shooting is top-notch. Running into battle, you can use your powers to quickly take control of the flow and pick apart anyone who didn't get a psychic lance to the face. The new mobility options are fun too. Zipping around from cover to cover feels real fresh, and then jumping up for a ground pound on top of a group of enemies, it never gets tired. It's still weird to see chest-high walls approaching you and knowing that enemies are already there waiting for you, but once you're in a fight, you lament having to holster your weapon. Exploration was a lot of fun too. The planets you land on and venture out into are varied enough that no two planets feel entirely alike, and the reintroduction to land vehicles was a really smart move. The Nomad has a lot more weight and usability than the Mako did in Mass Effect 1, and you could even upgrade it to behave and work a lot better along the line. Use your 6-wheel drive to ramp up a tight embankment. Clicking on the boost function and launching a jump to cross a ditch is a blast to do, and you'd be surprised how much of the terrain you can really cross. Inquisition zones had a similar look and feel, but being able to traverse it in such a way is pretty great. Mining is still in the game, but it's a lot more voluntary and explorative. You get mining nodes for each new forward point, or fast travel, that you unlock. Wander into the zone, click on the meter, and place down mining nodes for elements that you need. Do you want some more iron? Wander into that zone and see if you can find that one sweet spot where the controller rumbles and hits the plateau. These resources you pick up, both in mining and off the flora and fauna of Andromeda, you can later use to research and develop new weapons and armor. There's a lot of variety on offer with additional customizations for weapon effects and augments. Invest early and invest often in these things. Some of the crafting items I've stuck with have greatly improved over the course of the game. One type of remnant rifle I started using has stuck with me the whole game thanks to judicious upgrades. All these elements are really good, nice ideas that work and play well with each other. The UI takes a bit to get used to, and boy does it. But once you learn the workarounds and button prompts, you can quickly find what item you want, craft it, and then jaunt over to your loadout place to equip it. You can't equip things you find in the field right away, which is a shame, but that fast travel location you unlocked allows you to customize your whole rig and team. But it's a real shame that these things aren't complemented well by the rest of the vision. No matter how much you explore, no matter how much you mine and craft, you always have to return to the same boring story. I found myself running into story blockers constantly. Wait for this email from character X, wait for character Y to prepare this material while character Z has to translate this datapad. You'll find those a lot, and so then you have to complete the next major story branch or whatever marker in order to unlock that next chain of side quests. It's not fun to do. It doesn't even feel fair to do that to me. We hit some story threads that are finally getting exciting, and now I have to go off and do some other things, taking me out of the entire mental game. And the late game really only gets worse. The further you get into the story, the more worlds you unlock. You'll be required to planet jump from one story beat to the next. You meet one character on one planet who has to pick up something from another planet. You then return to the first character who then sends you out to another planet to meet with someone else. And then you have to wrap it all up by returning to the original task giver. Why? Can't I just call these people? I have a VidCon and I've used it to communicate across space before. Isn't that enough? Can't they just take a phone call? And don't get me started on the transition between planets. They look great, and those first couple of jumps between planets is really remarkable. When you're on a particular quest thread, you have to go through like these 10 to 15 second animations every single time. Zoom out from the galaxy map, select your new system, go to that system, which is another animation, find the planet, one more transition, zoom in on the planet, then back out, and now you have to cycle around the planet all the way to find the drop zone. I've been to this drop zone, just let me go there. One planet, Kadara, has you going through 2 separate checkpoints just to get to the major bit. Go to the port, load up into the slums, and then cross a physical barrier to get the ability to fast travel to where you actually need to go. can't I just do this from space? Do I not have a shuttle that I know for a fact is on board my ship? It's padding. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's padding that forced me to take on multiple quest lines at the same time so I could just go to a single planet and knock them all out in one go, jumping from one story thread to the next in quick bursts. That is as much jarring as it is inconvenient. I'm at the end, thankfully. I saw the credits roll, and all I can think about is wanting to do it all again, seeing if I can change certain outcomes. BioWare has a really good formula going for them. They drop you into a situation and give you an impossible choice, and you feel compelled to make the right one, but always wonder, what if? That type of hook keeps you going regardless of the game if you're playing, and it has carried them pretty well so far. I want to go back in as a female rider, romance someone new, make different choices, and see how far I can push the boundaries on the game. I think it won't be that hard. As I've said, the strings pulling at these things here are pretty transparent, but it's still just enticing enough that I want to suffer through it all again with veteran eyes, just to see how much I can change in the long run. But I think I will wait. The game is a burnout, hitting you hard and fast and then letting you sizzle for the next 50 hours. It's a massive undertaking, and it's almost a wonder this game came out at all for all the ideas that are crammed into here. But I can't help but think that this needed another year or two in the oven to fully realize all that it aspires to. It is a shame, because while it does need that time, it also feels and plays like a game that is 3 years too late. If this came out around or before Dragon Age Inquisition, this would be an instant Game of the Year contender for sure. But because we have seen games do the same things, oftentimes better, this game will quickly be shuffled out within the next 6 months. People will move on from this far quicker than other BioWare properties. Why would you spend money on this when so many other games just this year are doing crazy and different things so much better? The answer, I suspect, will largely lie in your capacity to deal with Andromeda on its own terms. Its one sole redeemable trait is how brave it is. It doesn't shy away from itself. The animations are janky, but it forces you to look at characters' faces. It prints out these beautiful vistas that linger for a long time on camera. It wants you to stop and smell the roses, no matter how badly they're rotting on the vine. It wants you to fall in love with Mass Effect all over again, and damn if that isn't something worth trying to do. Save your money here, though, and play through the original trilogy again. You'll be playing a similar story anyways.